The granite in the Great Pyramid, if you look at the famous King's Chamber, its walls and its roof, the ceiling of the King's Chamber, are all made with gigantic granite blocks.
For decades, mainstream archaeology had one answer for how ancient Egyptians cut granite: dolerite pounding. Rows of workers hammering stone against stone until temples and obelisks slowly emerged from raw rock. It was the settled story, closed, accepted, taught in every classroom. Until Grok AI ran the numbers. When the AI cross-referenced field measurements, microscopic surface analyses, and manufacturing data from the Aswan granite quarries, it flagged something no textbook had addressed directly.
These huge granite stelae, they're very similar in many ways to ancient Egyptian obelisks.
The marks left in that stone are not consistent with any tool ancient Egypt is documented to have possessed. Not close, not approximately. The evidence points somewhere else entirely. And once you see what Grok found carved into that granite, the official story stops making sense in a way that is very difficult to unsee. The hidden technology. Let's start with what you probably think you know, because the real story is nothing like the official version. And the gap between the two is exactly what Grok AI was built to find. The granite quarries of Aswan sit a few miles from the banks of the Nile in southern Egypt. Most tourists never visit. Most textbooks barely mention them. But this is where the stone came from. The same stone used to build temples that have survived 4,000 years. The same stone in the obelisks that were shipped thousands of miles across the ancient world. The same stone that forms the inner chambers of structures so precisely constructed that modern engineers still argue about how they were built. And the quarry itself? The quarry has a secret that mainstream archaeology has been explaining away for decades. Scattered across the quarry floor and carved into its walls are curved, scooping marks pressed deep into the granite. Not the kind of rough pitting you'd expect from a tool hitting a rock. These are smooth, arcing cuts, each one flowing into the next with a rhythmic consistency that catches the light at certain angles and makes the surface look almost machined. Here's what the textbooks will tell you. Ancient workers used balls of dolerite, a hard volcanic rock, to pound the granite down through brute, repetitive force. Rows of workers, hours of effort, sweat and patience and sheer human persistence. It's a tidy story. It sounds plausible. It fits the image we have of ancient civilization as heroic but limited. And it held up fine, until someone actually tried to reproduce it. Multiple experimental archaeology teams have attempted to recreate these marks using dolerite pounding on real granite surfaces. The results are documented and photographed, and the marks they produce look nothing like what is in Aswan. Dolerite pounding creates rough, irregular pits, varying depths, chaotic edges, inconsistent spacing. The kind of results you'd expect from a human hand striking stone across hours and days. Because the human hand, no matter how skilled, cannot eliminate variation. Fatigue sets in, angles shift, force fluctuates. The Aswan marks don't show any of that. And that's where Grok AI enters the picture, and where the story changes completely. The numbers that don't add up. When Grok AI was fed the full body of field measurements, microscopic analyses, and comparative studies on the Aswan quarry markings, it did something field researchers often can't. It stripped away the interpretive framing and just looked at the numbers. And here's the catch. The numbers are impossible. Across documented measurement studies, the size variation between individual scoop marks is less than 5%. Think about what that actually means. A worker in blazing desert heat, swinging a tool at solid granite for hours, day after day, producing marks that deviate from each other by less than 5% in size. Master craftsmen in controlled environments with precision instruments struggle to maintain that standard. In an open quarry in Bronze Age Egypt, it is essentially impossible. But it doesn't stop there. The spacing between marks is nearly mathematically uniform. When researchers plot the positions of the marks, they align in ways that imply a fixed mechanical relationship, as if the tool was constrained by a pivot point or a guide rail, controlling both the arc and the advance between each stroke. The spacing has the signature of a machine, not a hand. And get this, the angles. The angle at which the cutting edge entered the granite changes almost not at all from mark to mark. In any kind of hand tool work, that angle fluctuates constantly. In Aswan, it barely moves. Grok's analysis flagged this triple consistency: uniform size, uniform spacing, uniform entry angle, as statistically improbable for any unguided hand tool. Not impossible, improbable. And in science, that distinction matters enormously, because improbable patterns demand explanation. When a pattern appears once, you call it chance. When it appears hundreds of times across an entire quarry complex, chance stops being an explanation. Here's where we have to be honest with you. If you're finding this as hard to dismiss as we did when we first went through this data, you're not alone. The researchers who looked at these numbers didn't want them to mean what they mean. Stick with us through the next few chapters because it gets stranger. And if the kind of evidence this channel covers is something you want more of, hit subscribe now, because we're just getting started. The places no worker could reach. Here's the detail that stops engineers cold every single time. Some of the most precisely carved marks in the Aswan quarry are in locations where no human worker could physically stand to make them. Tight interior corners where two granite faces meet at angles too narrow to swing a tool. Vertical walls where the marks begin at ground level and continue upward in unbroken sequence. No scaffolding evidence, no footholds, no logical human access point. The marks don't thin out in the hard-to-reach places. They are equally consistent everywhere, in the easy spots and the physically impossible ones. Think about what that means for a second. If you were a foreman overseeing an ancient quarry and your workers were struggling to reach a corner, you'd expect the results to show it. You'd expect rougher marks, shallower cuts, less consistency. The evidence that your workforce was human would be written into the surface. In Aswan, it isn't. The difficult locations and the accessible ones produce the same mark. Whatever made those cuts wasn't limited by the geometry of the space. And then there are the shafts. Vertical pits scattered across the quarry floor, plunging 30 to 50 feet straight down into the granite, 3 to 4 feet wide, smooth walls, and carved into those smooth walls, in perfect sequence all the way to the bottom, are the same curved scoop marks found everywhere else. Now picture what it would take to carve those marks by hand. You would have to descend into a narrow stone tube barely wide enough to turn around in near total darkness, surrounded by granite dust, with almost no room to move a tool, and somehow produce marks that are just as consistent as the ones made in open air for 30 feet, 50 feet, straight down into the rock. Dr. Marcus Lehner, an engineer who has consulted on confined space precision manufacturing, reviewed documented photographs of the shaft walls for a 2019 independent assessment. His reaction when he saw the consistency of the marks relative to the physical space available: there is no hand tool in existence that could produce this result in this geometry. You would need a purpose-built robotic system for confined space operation. He was not writing about ancient Egypt. He was describing what modern industry would require just to match it. Grok cross-referenced the shaft dimensions, marked consistency, data, and known Bronze Age tool inventories, and reached the same conclusion independently. The physical constraints of the shafts are incompatible with the mechanical results observed. The AI flagged this as one of the strongest individual data points in the entire analysis. Not because the shafts are dramatic, but because they are definitive. The geometry of the space mathematically eliminates the conventional explanation. Something other than a hand was guiding the cuts. But here's where it gets strange, because the shafts are not even the most unsettling part. What the microscope reveals. Pull the quarry marks out of their historical context and put them under a microscope. Forget ancient Egypt for a moment. Just look at the physical evidence on the stone surface and ask, what kind of tool made this? That's exactly the approach Grok AI applied when it analyzed the microscopic data from the cut surfaces. And what it found doesn't point backward into ancient history. It points forward into modern precision manufacturing. The first anomaly is spiral patterning. On the interior face of some marks, microscopic spiral grooves run consistently across the cut surface. Spiral patterns in cutting surfaces are not random. They are the geometric signature of rotary tools, instruments that spin while they cut. You see this pattern in drill bits, lathe operations, milling machines. The spiral is the trace of a rotating edge advancing through material, and it shows up in the Aswan granite thousands of years before any rotary cutting technology is supposed to have existed. Here's the catch. It doesn't show up once or twice. It shows up repeatedly across multiple independently examined surfaces, at multiple independent points in the quarry. Grok's analysis cross-referenced the spiral signatures against the full catalog of documented ancient Egyptian cutting tools and found 0 matches. The spirals are inconsistent with every tool in the known ancient Egyptian inventory. They are consistent with one thing: rotation. The second anomaly is localized heat evidence. The crystal structure of the granite immediately adjacent to some cut marks shows signs of rapid, intense, point source thermal stress, not the distributed impact energy of dolerite pounding, which spreads force across a broad contact area and leaves a characteristic pattern of microfractures. This is different, concentrated, directional, the signature of something generating extreme friction at a single cutting edge. The signature of something spinning fast against hard stone, long enough to heat the surface to a measurable degree. And get this? Localized heat evidence at a cut surface is not just unusual for Bronze Age Egypt. It is unusual for any hand tool tradition anywhere in the ancient world. There is no manual technique that concentrates enough friction at a single point to produce the thermal signature observed. This is by definition the trace of a mechanical process. The third anomaly is material residue. Chemical analyses have detected traces of extremely hard abrasive compounds embedded in and around some cut surfaces. Substances consistent with corundum, a 9 on the Mohs hardness scale, second only to diamond, or compounds similar to synthetic diamond dust. These materials are not associated with any Bronze Age Egyptian toolkit. They are associated with modern industrial precision abrasive cutting. Their presence at the cutting surface implies they were part of the cutting process itself, not incidental contamination. And get this, all 3 anomalies point in the same direction. Grok's cross-referencing of these microscopic findings against the database of known cutting technologies produced a single category of closest modern analogs: diamond-tipped rotary cutters, ultrasonic cutting systems, high-pressure abrasive water jet machinery, the tools that today's precision stone fabricators use when working with granite-class materials, 3 independent lines of microscopic evidence, 3 separate analytical pathways, 1 conclusion, and that conclusion is not ancient Egypt. So, how old are the marks really? Because here's where the timeline does something that nobody expected. A technology that ran backward. Dr. Sarah Parcak, a satellite archaeologist at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, who has spent years mapping Egyptian sites from orbit, described her reaction to the chronological data from the Aswan quarry marks in a 2018 conference presentation. She said, and this is close to verbatim, "The stratigraphy suggests a technological regression, which means either our dating is wrong or something happened to this knowledge that we don't have a framework for." Here is what she was reacting to. When researchers compare quarry marks from sections definitively dated to known Egyptian dynastic periods against sections that show evidence of being significantly older, the newer sections are rougher. The older sections are more precise. That is the opposite of everything technological history tells us to expect. Technology advances, techniques improve. A civilization that starts cutting stone poorly should, over generations, get better. That is the standard model. That is why we assume the most sophisticated ancient artifacts are the most recent ones. Progress is supposed to be directional. In Aswan, it isn't. Here's how the dating was established, and this part is critical. In certain sections of the quarry, red ochre paintings sit directly on top of the carved scoop marks. The paintings were applied to the carved surface, which means the carved surface already existed when the painters arrived. Those paintings have been dated, and they predate dynastic Egyptian civilization by thousands of years. The carvings beneath them are older still. They were already there long enough to become a canvas before the Egypt of the pharaohs even began. And those oldest marks are the most precise ones in the quarry. Grok's analysis identified this chronological pattern as consistent with inherited knowledge degradation. A civilization applying tools or methods it received from somewhere earlier without fully understanding the underlying principles, and losing precision over time as the original source of that knowledge receded. The AI cross-referenced this regression pattern against documented cases of technological inheritance in ancient cultures and found multiple parallels. Situations where successor civilizations applied inherited knowledge less effectively than their predecessors, but none that involved a gap as large as what the Aswan evidence implies. Not advancement, inheritance, followed by slow decline. And the starting point of that inheritance was more advanced than anything we have on record. What if the greatest technology existed at the beginning, not at the end? What if the people who made the most perfect cuts in Aswan were not who we think? The answer to that question leads somewhere that even the researchers involved weren't prepared for. The knowledge that shouldn't have existed is something that almost never gets mentioned in discussions of the Aswan quarry, and it might be the strangest detail of all, because it doesn't just suggest advanced tools, it suggests advanced knowledge of a completely different kind. Granite is not uniform stone. Beneath the surface, it contains natural planes of weakness, crystalline veins, internal fracture lines that are completely invisible from the outside. These hidden structures determine how the stone will behave under stress, where it will yield, where it will resist. Mapping them is critical to efficient quarrying. Today we use ultrasonic imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and detailed geological analysis to identify them before cutting. Even with that technology, subsurface granite mapping is genuinely difficult work, and get this, certain cuts in the Aswan quarry appear to follow internal vein structures that could not have been visible from the exterior surface. The cutting paths turn and adjust in ways that correspond to geological features hidden inside the stone, features that should have been completely invisible without subsurface imaging equipment. Grok flagged this pattern specifically in its analysis. The AI cross-referenced the documented cutting paths against published geological surveys of the quarry's subsurface structure, and the correlation is not random. The probability of accidentally following invisible internal veins with the consistency observed across dozens of cuts spanning a large complex is statistically negligible. This isn't a few lucky strikes. It's a systematic pattern across the entire site. This means whoever made these cuts knew what was inside the stone before they cut it. They either had a method for seeing what we cannot see without modern instruments, or they had knowledge of the stone's internal structure that came from somewhere we haven't identified. Neither option is comfortable within the conventional framework. Both are implied by the evidence Grok assembled. How does that knowledge exist without the technology we use to acquire it? That's a question Grok could flag. It could not resolve it, because nothing in the documented ancient toolkit explains it. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable chapter in this entire story. What history might be hiding. There are three ways to interpret everything we've walked through. All three are legitimate. None can currently be ruled out. The first interpretation is that conventional archaeology is essentially correct. All the anomalies, the consistent marks, the inaccessible locations, the spiral patterns, the abrasive residues, the age reversal, the vein-following cuts, are either misinterpreted by non-specialists, overstated in alternative literature, or explainable by techniques and materials that simply haven't been archaeologically documented yet. Absence of a complete conventional explanation isn't proof of something extraordinary. Records are incomplete. Ancient technologies leave inconsistent evidence. This remains a legitimate scientific position. The second interpretation is that the people who worked these quarries in the earliest periods developed a level of tool sophistication that has been entirely lost. Not through supernatural means, but through the simple fragility of knowledge. Advanced techniques, dependent on perishable materials, closely guarded trade secrets, craft traditions that died with the craftsman, could have flourished and disappeared without leaving a clear archaeological signature. Roman concrete's formula was lost for over 1,000 years. Damascus steel's production method vanished and took centuries to partially reverse engineer. Knowledge is more fragile than stone. And the third interpretation, the one that Grok's analysis points toward without formally endorsing, is that the oldest marks in Aswan were not made by any civilization currently identified in the historical record. That there existed in Egypt and possibly elsewhere a presence with capabilities dramatically beyond what we attribute to Bronze Age humanity. That what we call ancient Egypt may have been a successor culture, inheriting a landscape already shaped by something earlier, something more capable, something we haven't yet found direct evidence for in a form that mainstream archaeology accepts. Here's where it gets harder to dismiss, because here's what Grok found when it widened its analysis beyond Egypt. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, massive stone blocks bearing precisely machined H-shaped cuts, with tolerance measurements tighter than most modern fabrication standards, have been dated. To a civilization with no written language and no documented metalworking tradition capable of producing them. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the Temple of Jupiter's foundation platform includes individual stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, fitted with sub-centimeter precision, with no known ancient machine capable of lifting or positioning them. At Sacsayhuaman in Peru, interlocking polygonal stones fitted so precisely that a sheet of paper cannot be inserted between them, built by a civilization that, according to the official record, had no wheel, no iron tools, and no written engineering traditions. 3 sites, 3 continents. Still the same unanswered question. None of the 3 interpretations can be definitively ruled out. What the evidence is not consistent with is the confident certainty with which the conventional story has been told for over a century. The quarry in the silence of evening. When the heat lifts and the tourists leave, the Aswan quarry goes quiet. The granite glows reddish gold in the low sun. Those marks catch the shadows in their perfect arcs, and for a moment, the stone almost feels like it's waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Run your hand across those curves, and the smoothness is eerie in a way that's hard to describe, because what you're feeling isn't the texture of ancient craftsmanship. It feels like the product of a system, something operating with a consistency that no individual human hand maintains across thousands of repetitions in an open quarry. And Grok's analysis put numbers to that feeling. The stone isn't lying. The data isn't wrong. The question is whether we're willing to follow it wherever it leads. What comes next? Here's the honest state of this investigation right now. It is nowhere near finished. And the gap between what has been studied and what needs to be studied is, frankly, embarrassing given what the existing evidence already implies. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the quarry floors remain incomplete. Systematic microscopic sampling of the cut surfaces has never been conducted at the scale the evidence actually warrants. We're talking about spot analyses on a site that spans acres of carved stone. The vein-following cuts have not been digitally mapped against comprehensive subsurface geological models of the quarry's internal structure. The full chronological stratigraphy of the marks, which came first, which came later, what changed in the execution, between the oldest and the most recent, has not been formally established across the entire site. These are not minor oversights. These are the exact investigations that the existing evidence demands, and they have not been done. Part of the reason is institutional. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the researchers most capable of conducting the necessary analyses are the same researchers who have the most to lose professionally by pursuing conclusions that challenge the established framework. That's not a conspiracy. That's how professional incentives work in any academic field. You don't get grants to find evidence that your textbooks are wrong, but here's what's different now. AI analysis is entering this field, and it changes the dynamic. Systems like Grok can synthesize evidence across geology, materials, science, manufacturing, engineering, and archaeology simultaneously, without the interpretive weight of existing assumptions, without the career pressures that make human researchers cautious about following data to uncomfortable places. Grok's analysis of the Aswan evidence did not try to reach a conclusion. It tried to read the pattern, and the pattern it read is not the one that's been in the textbooks. The next decade of research may look very different from the last century. Not because the stone changed, but because we finally have tools capable of reading it honestly. We have been asking, how did the ancient Egyptians cut granite with the tools they had? The evidence from Aswan, the marks, the microscopy, the chronology, the impossible shafts, the knowledge of hidden veins, suggests the better question is, what were the actual tools? We don't yet have an answer, but for the first time, that question is being asked without being suppressed by an answer that was already decided. The stone has been waiting patiently, precise, impossibly consistent across thousands of years and thousands of marks, holding a secret in one of the hardest materials on Earth. The closer we look, the more rigorous the analysis, the more honest the reading, the more certain it becomes that the secret is real. If this shifted how you see ancient history, if the evidence moved the ground even slightly under what you thought you knew, drop a comment below. Tell us which part hit hardest. We read every one. And if you want to keep going deeper into the ancient sites where the evidence refuses to behave the way the textbooks say it should, The next video is already there. The stone keeps its secrets. We are going to keep looking.